October 26, 1941. A teenage girl walks through the streets of Minsk. Around her neck hangs a placard that reads, "We are partisans and have shot at German troops." Her steps are steady, her face calm. Civilians watch in silence, afraid to speak. Soldiers march beside her, rifles at the ready. She is 17 years old. Her name is Masha Bruskina. In a few minutes, she will be dead. Masha Bruskina was born in Minsk in 1924. She grew up in an ordinary Jewish family in a city that was then part of the Soviet Union. Minsk was not a great metropolis, but it was a place of learning, industry, and culture. Masha's childhood was marked by study and discipline. Friends later remembered her as a serious girl, reserved but intelligent, always eager to read, always attentive to her lessons. Teachers saw in her a mind that was curious, precise, and thoughtful. She came of age in a world that was increasingly uncertain. The 1930s were years of upheaval in Belarus. Stalin's regime brought both modernization and repression. Jewish families like hers lived under the official promise of equality, but anti-Semitism still lingered beneath the surface. Even so, Masha's life, until 1941, was not unlike that of many young Soviet girls. She studied, she dreamed of her future, and she belonged to a city that seemed to hold promise. That promise was destroyed in a single week. On June 22, 1941, the German Wehrmacht launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. More than 3 million soldiers poured across the Soviet border. Their orders were clear: crush the Red Army, capture cities, and annihilate opposition. Belarus, lying directly in the path of the German advance, was among the first to suffer. Within days, Minsk was under siege. German armored divisions cut off retreating Soviet units, and by the end of June, the city was encircled. Soviet soldiers fought desperately to defend it, but their resistance was brief. Columns of prisoners filled the roads. By June 28th, Minsk had fallen. For Masha, the city of her childhood was transformed overnight. Soldiers patrolled the streets. Fire smoldered in the ruins. Executions took place in public squares. Posters announced that any act of resistance would bring death not only to the guilty, but to their families and neighbors. The Jewish population, including Masha and her family, was forced into a ghetto. Thousands were crammed into overcrowded streets. Hunger gnawed at daily life, and disease spread quickly. The freedom she had known was replaced by fear, confinement, and humiliation. She was only 17, yet the world she had grown up in, the schools, the books, the quiet rhythms of ordinary life, had vanished. It was in this atmosphere of occupation and terror that Masha made her choice. Others stayed silent, hoping simply to survive. She decided otherwise. In the weeks after Minsk fell, the city lived under the iron grip of occupation. German authorities ruled with calculated brutality. Every street bore the weight of fear. Posters warning of executions, soldiers dragging civilians away, families whispering in shadows. To help a partisan, to shelter a fugitive, even to speak a word of defiance, meant certain death. Masha was 17. She might have hidden in silence, as so many did, but her sense of duty was stronger than her fear. She volunteered as a nurse in a Red Army hospital, one of the few places where wounded Soviet soldiers still lingered. The work was exhausting, the supplies were meager, but here she found a way to resist. Day after day, she cared for men who were little more than shadows of themselves. Soldiers burned, shot, or broken in retreat. Many begged not to be left behind, terrified that capture meant execution. Masha listened, and she acted. She smuggled in civilian clothes so they could disguise themselves as ordinary workers. She passed forged papers, carefully prepared by underground contacts so they could slip through checkpoints. She guided some to safe houses where partisans would move them further along escape routes into the forests. These were not small risks. German intelligence was vigilant. The Gestapo had infiltrators everywhere, listening, watching. Yet she carried out her work with calm precision. She did not boast of what she was doing, nor did she hesitate. To those around her, she seemed older than her years, composed, quiet, and unflinching. Every action was an act of defiance. Every soldier she helped escape was another blow against the occupiers. In those weeks, Masha became more than a nurse. She became a lifeline for men who otherwise would have been condemned. The choice she made was extraordinary for someone so young. She had no weapons, no uniform, and no command. What she had was courage, and the resolve to act when silence would have been easier. Her decision marked her as a partisan, though she never set foot in the forests or fired a shot. In the dark corridors of the hospital, under the eyes of the enemy, Masha Bruskina declared her resistance not with words, but with deeds. By the autumn of 1941, German control over Minsk seemed absolute. Patrols filled the streets, checkpoints stood at every corner, and the ghetto was sealed behind barbed wire. Yet, beneath the surface, resistance continued. Every soldier who slipped through Masha's hands into the forests was proof that occupation was not complete, that defiance was still possible. But resistance carried with it constant danger. The Germans knew that underground networks were helping prisoners escape, and they sought to crush them through fear and betrayal. Informants worked alongside the Gestapo. A careless word spoken in the wrong place could mean exposure. In October, Masha's work was discovered. The details remain uncertain whether it was an informer within the hospital, a soldier who broke under interrogation, or suspicion raised by her movements. What is known is that she was arrested, taken by German authorities, and accused of aiding partisans. For a girl of 17, the ordeal must have been terrifying, yet those who later learned of her arrest described her as calm, even then. Interrogations were brutal, designed to break the spirit and force confessions. But Masha did not betray others. She carried the punishment herself. The Germans decided her fate quickly. She was not to be shot quietly in a prison yard. She was to be hanged in public, her death a lesson to the people of Minsk. A young woman, visibly Jewish, accused of helping the enemy, her execution would serve as a warning and a threat. In preparing her for death, the Germans forced humiliation upon her. She was made to wear a placard, crudely written, declaring, "We are partisans and have shot at German troops." It was meant to strip away her humanity and brand her forever as an enemy. But in time, that placard became not a mark of shame, but a symbol of courage. On the morning of October 26, 1941, the city of Minsk awoke to silence. Word had spread that an execution was coming. People gathered quietly along the streets, not out of choice, but because they were compelled to witness. The Germans understood the power of fear, and they wanted the whole city to see what became of those who resisted. Masha Bruskina was brought from her cell. With her were two others, Kirill Trus, a factory worker, and Volodya Sherbatsevich, a teenage boy like her. Around each of their necks hung a placard. Masha's read, "We are partisans and have shot at German troops." The words were false, but the punishment was real. The procession began. Flanked by armed guards, the three prisoners were marched through the streets of Minsk. Soldiers barked orders. Civilians stood frozen, afraid to speak, afraid even to look for too long. Some whispered prayers, others turned their faces away. Witnesses remembered Masha's composure. She walked with her head held high, her expression calm, her steps measured. She did not beg, she did not cry. At 17, she showed a dignity that defied the cruelty around her. For those who dared glance at her face, the image never left them. At the gallows, the ritual continued. The Germans bound their hands and placed the ropes around their necks. The silence was overwhelming. No speeches, no final words were permitted. The purpose was not justice, but terror. The trapdoors opened. In an instant, 3 lives ended. Their bodies were left hanging, swaying in the cold October air. For days they remained there, on public display, a warning to all who might think of resistance. But the warning carried another message, one the Germans did not intend. The people of Minsk remembered not the placards or the ropes, but the calm young girl who faced death without fear. Even as her name was erased from official records, her image lingered, haunting and unforgotten. The execution of Masha Bruskina and her comrades was photographed. Images of her final walk and the gallows survived the war. Yet, in the Soviet Union, her name was never spoken aloud. In official records, she became simply the girl who was hanged in Minsk. The men beside her were identified. She was left unnamed. The silence was deliberate. Survivors who knew her insisted that she was Masha Bruskina, the Jewish teenager who had aided partisans in the hospital. But their testimony was ignored. In state narratives, her identity was erased, swallowed by the machinery of ideology. Anti-Semitism played its part. To elevate a young Jewish girl as a martyr of the Soviet resistance did not fit the image authorities wished to project. Her photograph was reproduced countless times, yet the captions avoided her name. School children learned of executions in Minsk, but not of her. To the public, she was only the unknown girl, a faceless victim in a sea of suffering. This erasure deepened the tragedy. The Germans had hanged her to terrify the people of Minsk, to strip her of humanity. Decades later, her own country denied her the dignity of recognition. She had faced death with courage, yet her memory was reduced to silence. For those who remembered her personally, the silence was unbearable. Friends and witnesses whispered her name in private, even when it was dangerous to do so. They spoke of her calmness, her resolve, her quiet acts of defiance. In their memories, she lived on, though the official record pretended she did not exist. For decades after the war, Masha Bruskina's image lingered in silence. Photographs of her final walk appeared in books and exhibitions, yet the captions never gave her a name. She remained a shadow in history, visible, but voiceless. That silence began to break in the late 1960s and 1970s, when survivors and historians pressed for truth. Former partisans who had known her insisted that the young woman in the photographs was Masha Bruskina. Slowly, the evidence grew too strong to deny. Documents were re-examined, testimonies confirmed. At last, her identity was restored. In Minsk, a plaque was placed on the site where she had been hanged. Later, monuments were raised in her honor. Schools and memorials began to tell her story. For the Jewish community, her recognition was deeply significant. She became a symbol of both resistance and remembrance, proof that their suffering and sacrifice would no longer be hidden. Today, Masha Bruskina is remembered not only in Belarus, but across the world. Her name stands alongside those of countless others who resisted Nazi terror. What sets her apart is not military victory or grand speeches, but the simplicity of her courage. At 17, she chose defiance over silence, humanity over fear. In Holocaust remembrance, she has become a symbol of the countless young lives cut short by tyranny. For historians, her story stands as a reminder of how easily memory can be manipulated, how truth can be buried, and how vital it is to restore the names of those the world tried to forget. Masha Bruskina's life was brief. She was only 17 when she walked to her death on the streets of Minsk. She carried no rifle, commanded no army, and left behind no speeches. What she left was something far greater, an example of courage in its purest form. The Nazis sought to strip her of humanity. They hanged her with a placard that mocked her as a partisan, hoping her death would terrify others into silence. The state that inherited her city then denied her name, burying her story in anonymity for decades. Yet neither rope nor silence erased her. Her face, calm and resolute in the last moments of her life, endured in photographs. Her name, whispered by survivors who refused to forget, outlived both her killers and those who tried to erase her. Today, she is remembered as Masha Bruskina, a girl who defied tyranny with nothing but her will. Her story reminds us that resistance is not measured only in battles won, but in the decision to stand firm when surrender seems inevitable. She was young, anonymous, powerless in the eyes of her captors. Yet she walked with dignity, and in that dignity, she defeated them. Masha Bruskina's last walk was not into silence. It was into history.